Hello and welcome to Creative Conversations. I'm Rosie, and you're welcome to listen in to a conversation I'm having with John Thomas. This is actually a part two of a conversation we started about poetry. So if you haven't listened to part one, you might want to go and find that. So, John, do you have any tips for someone starting out in appreciation of poetry?
Yeah, the Psalms. The Psalms are amazing because, I mean, there's phrases in the Psalms that are so poetic, but we're so used to them, we don't realize how common they are. The Lord is my shepherd. I mean, really? Is he actually your shepherd? I mean, I understand the concept, but you've just used a metaphor to describe a relationship. He's the one that cares for you. He's the one that makes sure that you have what you need. He's the one that makes sure that you get to where you need to be so that you have food, so that you have safety. He's the one that protects you. He's the one that watches over you. He's the one that's with you, that's spending time with you, that's making sure that you get fed, that's making sure that you have, even in dangerous places, he's the one that's there so that you don't have to be trying to defend yourself, because a sheep can't defend itself. You can trust in him. There's so much that's there. Begin to take those metaphors that we're so familiar with and allow the things that we're already familiar with to go deeper, because we recognize that we're talking about metaphor. You got the Sermon on the Mount. Do not worry about what you will eat or what you will wear. Do not the lilies of the field. I mean, they're clothed better than all of Solomon in all of his glory. If God's going to give them beauty, how much more is he going to give you what you need? Look at the birds. They have food. They're cared for. Think about how their capacity to plan and to strategize, it is not what ours is, and yet God takes care of them. How much more is he going to take care of you? Now, you've just gotten these pictures. They're so common that we don't realize how metaphorical they are, but we actually do metaphor. What we're not really comfortable with is new metaphor. And a lot of times when people say, I don't really get metaphor, most of the time they mean they don't get new metaphor. But if you allow yourself time to imagine it, and well, what does that actually mean? I mean, think about the lily of the field. Think about a field of lilies. Maybe pull up a picture of them, find it on the internet, and look at the lilies. Look how beautiful they are. Get a close-up, get a broad picture where you see the whole field, and then get a close-up of a lily and just look at how beautiful it is and appreciate its beauty. And think about how common that lily is. That lily is going to grow up, it's going to be beautiful for a season, and it's going to disappear, never to be seen again. And God would spend that much time to make that gorgeous of a plant for enjoyment. And there are lilies in fields that nobody will ever get to see because nobody ever goes there. And yet he still made it beautiful. It's not about function that makes it beautiful. It's about God's intent. And then apply that to yourself. Thinking about that, and then what are the application of that to me? Those kinds of thought processes, they begin to awaken something. And so as we start with these scriptural pictures, then all of a sudden we're able to go into poetry. The thing with poetry and some people's comments of, I find poetry hard to understand, is a lot of the very famous poets were from a different time period. They use words that we're not common with, that we're not familiar with. And so when they're using the words, we don't even have the grid necessarily to put them in until we've learned to see how those words are used and understand those words. You can find very common poetry. I mean, thinking about Dr. Seuss, like he creates these beautiful, fun stories that are just interesting and intriguing, but they communicate truth in an interesting way that sticks with people's minds. I mean, there's so many different examples like that. So you can find poetry that connects with you. It's just not all poetry is going to connect with everybody. I mean, there's some poets that I just don't get. I read them and I'm like, um, that sounds really deep, and I can appreciate that it's pretty. I have no idea what you're saying, but there's other ones that I really get. So you find that you do get, but even if you're not going to get interested in poetry, just look at scripture in that way and understand the metaphor.
It's so beautiful. You're making me just feel like life is poetry. You know, it's just so central, even watching nature evolving and growing. And I really connected with what you said about function. I came from a legal background, and it's very, you know, concise, keeping things to the point. And I worked in the office in a school, and my communication was quite to the point. And my boss said, you know, you need to make it more beautiful, more flowery, you know, because of the experience. And I remember going to God about it, and God was like, think about trees. And I was like, okay, so trees have a function, oxygen, but they're life-giving, but aren't they beautiful? You know, God was just having fun and just wanted to make something beautiful. You know, God is not just functional, as you were saying. So that's what that reminded me of.
Yeah.
So John, is
how many different types of trees are there? Like he could have just one type of tree. I mean, that's amazing.
That is, wow. I love how you were able there to extend my thinking. I never even thought about that at the time. That was a good few years ago, but that's an example for if you're listening, you know, how to take it even deeper, not just, okay, a tree, you know, how many different kinds of trees. That's great. So John, as well as appreciating poetry, you actually write a little bit yourself, don't you?
I do. Funny enough, I always have. When I was a kid, I can remember I went to, my dad was taking this course at Dale Carnegie. If you're in America, it's Carnegie, but it's actually supposed to be said Carnegie. I've learned that in Scotland. He did the whole course on how to win friends, influence people, and then public speaking. My dad was taking a public speaking course, and you know, I was just hanging out with him because it was my mom was doing something, and so I got to spend the day with my dad. And so I'm sitting in, and I'm just kind of listening, and I wrote a poem about what was going on. And actually, I guess it was good enough that they read it in front of the whole class. Because it just kind of communicated what was being said in that moment. So I've always kind of had that thing. Like I love words and I love imagination, and I read a lot, and that really helps. So when I was a teenager and I was going through a dark period, I wrote a lot of poetry. When I found the Lord, I actually had to destroy all of that poetry because it was really dark. And some of it actually quite demonic. But when I found the Lord, it took me a while before I really started writing poetry again. And part of it was just there was nobody talking about that. But I would be driving down the road, or I would be prayer or something, and a phrase would start to form in my head. And it would be like a couple lines of a poem. I had one that formed a number of years ago, and I've turned it into a poem. I actually turned it into a song, but it was just a meditation of my heart, and it was a very short, four lines. Though he throw me in a corner and leave me lay, or put me on a shelf in grand display, I am yours. I am yours. And it was just this cry of my heart that no matter if if God had nothing else for me to do other than to be his and nobody ever found out about it, just throw me in the corner and leave me lay. Or if he puts me in on a shelf, he puts me in a place where everybody's going to see it. It does not matter. I'm his. And it just, so that little phrase crying out of my spirit, it began, and I began to form it. And so those kinds of ideas and would happen periodically. So I started writing poetry again. And a number of years ago, I was in a meeting, and during worship, the atmosphere, the presence of the Lord was so strong. I just started having words rise up in my spirit that fit the atmosphere. And it wasn't really poetry. Like I've written the kind of the 4 lines where the second and the fourth line rhyme and the first and the third line rhyme. And I've done kind of different types of styles of poetry, but this was actually more of a spoken word thing that just arose out of the atmosphere. And so I started doing that. And then I would speak it during the meeting, and it would open up this atmosphere that what I was experiencing in my spirit when I gave it words, it just opened it up for everybody to come into this experience, and it lifted the level of spiritual activity in the room. And I started recognizing that there's something, and again, this is connected to a prophetic function, because the idea of the prophetic function is when you give communication to something that you've experienced, it opens up a door for others to experience it. One of the words for seer in the Hebrew is 3 Hebrew characters, which originally Hebrew was pictographs. So the letters, they would actually form pictures. They weren't just shapes that gave you sound, but they were pictures that gave you concepts. And when you put the concepts together, it communicated the word. And the word, one of the words for seer, there's 2 words for seer, it's a picture of a knife, a tent wall, and a tent peg. A knife, a tent wall, and a tent peg. So a knife is something that cuts. A tent wall is a division between what's outside and what's inside. A tent peg is something that anchors it. It holds it down, it secures it. And so the role of the seer is to cut through the veil to anchor people in what's on the other side. And when we communicate these things, poetry, prophetic words, things that are being given in the spirit, that we're picking up in the spirit, what it does, it opens up this capacity, this invitation for everybody that hears to come into that same experience in the spirit that evoked whatever it was that was produced from it. Which this is part of the power of whether it's creative art like painting, whether it's poetry, spoken word, and those other things. And when I started doing that, man, we saw some really fun stuff happen, and in opening up atmospheres in the room for everybody that was there.
So could we open up atmospheres right now? Do you have a piece of spoken word that you could share? Just to finish?
I do. So this is one that came out of a conference that we did here called Love and Prophecy. We did it in Dallas, where we publicly launched Streams Creative House. So it was out of that atmosphere. And as I read it, you'll kind of catch a little bit of that atmosphere. But I call it the sound.
Wow, go for it. Okay.
The sound carries a vibration, and the vibration carries a color. The spectrum of love being released in a kaleidoscope of textures, layering light in and out, behind and below, lifting you higher, feeling the power, the energies of heaven, the vibrations of spirit, the sound of the voice, echoing through your spirit until you resound with light. The voice, echoes of the voice of the instruments echoing the voice that holds all things together. that holds creation in order, correcting disorder, pulling you into purpose, into fulfillment of the original score written over your heart. Your sound found in the sound. Your heart beating to the rhythm of creation, the flow of the Creator, the original cadence, your home, your truth, only found in His truth. Your sound released, your voice discovered, your destiny realized, reality and potential becoming one as you resonate with the one. The original sounds from which all sounds find their source, the overarching song in which everything finds its place, fulfills its score. A symphony arising, Creator and creation pulsating together to the same beat, the same frame, the same wave, crashing over every discordant sound until all is consumed and brought into the pattern, the revelation of beauty, the definition of true, the expression of good, the one, the voice, the sound.
Wow, John, thank you so much for sharing that. That's so beautiful. I felt like it touched on some things we'd been talking about, and I loved like how it it started small and then it came down again. It's just beautiful. It's definitely something I'm gonna go back and listen to again. John, it's been really great chatting with you. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I feel like we could go on and chat more about it for hours, but thank you so much for coming on Creative Conversations.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me. It's good.